Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is Lahav Harkov, Senior Political Correspondent at the Jewish Insider. Lahav, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me on.
Before we get started, I just want to ask, how are you, where are you, and are you safe?
I'm in central Israel. I am safe right now, and we're very worried. My husband is doing reserve duty along with 300,000 other Israelis. Over 100% of Israelis showed up of the Israelis who were called showed up for reserve duty. We've had sirens, and we can hear the booms in the distance and fighter jets flying ahead, but I'm in a relatively safe sort of pocket where there hasn't been much action.
Hamas militants, as the world knows, launched an attack on Israel from the air, land, and sea over the weekend. It was the deadliest attack on Israel in over 50 years. So, can you explain the situation on the ground a little bit for us over the past few days?
So people are talking about it being the deadliest attack in over 50 years. You have to understand that 50 years ago and one day before this attack, the Yom Kippur War was launched, and that was the most Israeli casualties in one day. But those were soldiers. Those were wars happening on battlefields. In this case, this was Hamas terrorists coming into Israel. They killed soldiers, but they killed, at this point, the body count is up to 700 civilians. That's how many bodies have been found from that first day of carnage. They went into a field where there was a rave happening. It was 6:30 a.m. and people were still partying after having been out there all night, and just started indiscriminately shooting at people. They kidnapped people, they abducted people. I just heard a story from Israel's foreign minister. He did a briefing. He said that there were about 20 people who hid in a large trash can, and they threw a grenade into the trash can and killed all the people in there. And then, they went into towns. There's a lot of kibbutzes, which are sort of small agricultural communities near the Gaza border. And they went into people's homes and killed entire families. I heard a story of a man who the Hamas entered his home. They killed his wife. They kidnapped him as he was holding his 3-year-old. So no one knows where he and his 3-year-old are. They may have been abducted to Gaza. They may have been killed and their bodies haven't been found yet. And then their 2 children, their 6-year-old and 9-year-old, hid in a closet. And that's how they survived. And, for the Jewish people, stories of Jews being massacred and children hiding in closets to survive brings back the worst associations for us, and just innocent Jews being massacred is what happened this week.
The videos all shared on social media were horrifying. They were heart-wrenching. There are just no words to describe what is happening. But is Hamas still on the ground in Israel? And if so, where are they?
So most of the terrorists have been cleared out of Israel, but they're not entirely certain. In their attacks on Israeli army bases, they stole uniforms. And dressed up and in Israeli army uniforms, so they could be walking around. And they also, terrorists don't necessarily wear uniforms; they wear civilian clothing sometimes. And so people are being very cautious. They're still sort of locked down in the Gaza border area. They think that they've found most of them, but we don't know for certain.
And what is the mood and what is happening during the day, and how does that change at night?
So first of all, the mood in Israel is sort of shock and anger. This is just, like we said, beyond what anyone has seen really ever. I mean, it's literally it is the largest death toll of Jewish people, Jewish civilians in one day since the Holocaust. And so huge mourning, shock. You have families, thousands of families who don't know where their loved ones are. And so I think there's that is really what characterizes the mood during the day. But of course, there's also a really great sense of unity. You may have heard that we had a lot of political strife in Israel in the last few years, and in the last 9 months especially. It's been a very heated, intense sort of time internally in Israel. Yet all of those people have now come together and are fighting against one shared enemy. And so if Hamas thought we were going to be weaker because of our divisions, as it turns out, they eliminated that weakness of ours. And so people really are determined, and they're saying that, this is a real war against Hamas. It's not like in the past where Israel would try to just sort of subdue them for another year or two. This is war.
I do want to talk about that political strife a little bit. What is
Yeah.
the feeling in Israel right now about Prime Minister Netanyahu? Do people think that this intelligence failure falls directly on him?
Yeah, I mean, it's early. I think that what people are talking about more is sort of mourning the losses and also finding the people who are still missing. That being said, the question on everybody's mind is, how did this happen? What was the failure in our intelligence? And that goes all the way to the top. That includes Netanyahu, and there's certainly going to be some kind of reckoning for him. I mean, since the Yom Kippur War, which also started as a surprise, Israelis have always had an investigation after war or major military operations, and to make sure, to figure out what the failings were. And I think that this is going to have to be a huge investigation. I think there are a lot of questions here of how this could happen.
The Wall Street Journal rather reported that Iran, I'm going to read, quote their reporting. Iranian security officials helped plan Hamas's Saturday surprise attack on Israel and gave the green light for the assault at a meeting in Beirut last Monday, according to senior members of Hamas and Hezbollah, another Iran-backed militant group. What do you make of this reporting? Do the people of Israel right now put the blame on Iran too?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, certainly the government of Israel is talking about how Hamas is funded not only by Iran, but partly by Iran, and that they're partners of Iran. There have been pictures over the last year of Hamas leadership meeting with the Iranian leadership. Whether the Wall Street Journal report is accurate in terms of how direct the Iranian influence was, them giving the green light, them, helping plan it, at least from what officials in Israel are saying, including military officials, they're not able to confirm that, they're not willing to confirm that at this point, is more accurate. But I think that it wouldn't be surprising. I think the timing right now is when normalization talks between Israel and Saudi Arabia were very advanced, and it goes against everything that Iran wants and stands for Israel to be treated like a normal country in this region. The Iranian regime is an anti-Semitic regime that thinks that a Jewish state has no place in the Middle East, and they will do everything to try to stop it, or at least they say they will. And I think that when someone threatens your country, you should try to take it seriously.
Netanyahu declared war on Hamas on Saturday, soon after these brutal attacks. What can the world expect next, do you think?
I think it's highly likely there's going to be a ground incursion even in the next 24 hours. With the number of captives, the Israeli civilians who were abducted to Gaza, in addition to soldiers who are captive, there's no way to rescue them, to get them out of there simply with airstrikes. There are some reports of negotiations from that Qatar is mediating. Israel denies that at the moment, but I'm sure that there are some diplomatic channels going on. The Red Cross has not been able to visit these people. They're being spread all over Gaza. And I just don't see how a ground invasion is avoidable.
Do you think there's going to be a full-out war then between Israel and Iran?
I think that it's in Iran's hands at this point. I do. Their proxy in Lebanon is Hezbollah. There's been some mortars over Israel's northern border, not a lot, but a little bit. And if that continues, and Israel gets into a real war with Hezbollah as well as Hamas. Hezbollah is a lot closer to Iran in terms of like really being a proxy for Iran, as opposed to Hamas, which gets funding and some sort of training and advice from Iran. And I think that could develop into something bigger. But at this point, I mean, Israel is not looking for a bigger war. Right now, Israel wants to deal with Hamas once and for all.
This has obviously been the top story, the top headline, the top of everyone's mind globally over the past few days. But my last question to you is, do you think there's anything missing from the international conversation here?
That's an interesting question. I think this afternoon there's been a lot of talk of countries in Europe, especially, suspending their aid to the Palestinians. The European Union also suspended their aid, and they are the largest donors to the Palestinians. Um, Money is fungible. And even though these governments have sort of well documented sort of paper trails that show that the money is not going to terrorism, it just frees up other money for terrorism. And I think that, you know, Palestinian Authority, the Palestinians, they need to have some kind of civil society. They need to have schools. They need to have, organizations and things like that. And I understand that. But there needs to be some real accountability. And I think that the world needs to be looking at what it has done in recent years to encourage the Palestinians' leadership to behave with impunity.
How do you think the world enabled that then?
I mean, I just think that when you pour money into Gaza specifically, and Gaza is governed by Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, you're giving them money so that if the European Union is paying for their schools and their healthcare and all those things, then now have money freed up that they can go and build missiles, and shoot at Israel, and all those things cost money. Is it a perfect system? I don't know. I guess not. But I just think that the world sort of didn't do very much to get rid of Hamas. Like, there's been a terrorist organization running Gaza since 2006. Now, yes, they were elected. That is true. They were elected. But then they, of course, massacred the opposition. And that's been the case since 2006. Israel is constantly dealing with rocket fire. These communities that were massacred now, it's not like they had lived a peaceful existence. Missiles were being shot on them with some regularity. And the world often would just tell Israel to stand down. And they need to reconsider. They need to think that who they've been propping up, even those who don't give money, just with their messages, and not allowing Israel to fully defend itself.
I do want to ask really quickly about President Biden's response and what you think of that, your reaction to that. President Biden said he told Prime Minister Netanyahu that the U.S. will, quote, stand ready to offer all appropriate means of support. What does Israel think of the United States' response specifically?
I think that in terms of that response, that is what Israel wants from the U.S. First of all, to show sort of unequivocal support for Israel's defense, Israel's right to defend itself, and also to provide more financial support if it's needed for our military. I think at this point, Israel has not requested anything specific from the U.S., but it really appreciates the willingness. But, there's a much broader picture here of U.S. policy in the Middle East. The U.S. just allowed $6 billion of sanctions relief to Iran. And again, it's like what I was saying with Hamas, money is fungible. Those are $6 billion that will go to help the people of Iran, but then it frees up money for Iran to pay Hamas, to pay Hezbollah, to work on its nuclear program. And the Biden administration has not been tough on Iran. I mean, they've been very weak on Iran, and that endangers Israel.
That has been a criticism of the Biden administration, that $6 billion particularly. I do want to read the State Department spokesperson's response on X, formerly Twitter. He wrote this: let's be clear, the deal to bring U.S. citizens home from Iran has nothing to do with the horrific attack on Israel. Not a penny has been spent, and when it is, it can only go for humanitarian needs like food and medicine. Anything to the contrary is false. So I know you explained, yes, that money is going there, but it frees up other money. When you hear his response, what's your reaction?
I mean, they believe that they were doing the right thing, and I mean, I was very heartened and happy to see American hostages go home. Don't get me wrong, but the negotiations were not just about hostages, and they were, you should trade hostages for hostages, right? Not hostages for hostages plus $6 billion, and it just encourages this regime that openly expresses its ambition to commit genocide against the Jewish state, against Israel, and supports Hamas and Hezbollah, who also are anti-Semitic genocidal organizations.
Lahav, what are you looking out for next?
I think we need to look out for what the next stage of this war is going to be. I think there's going to be a ground invasion soon. I think we need to also look out for the world. They need to, there's a pattern with these operations in Gaza. This is different from anything we've seen before in terms of Hamas's assault on Israeli civilians, but in past sort of rounds of fighting with Gaza, the world gets bored after a few days. And I understand that when the conflict is far away, you're not going to pay attention to it all the time. But I think the world needs to remember who started this, who's the one who's murdering babies and elderly people and kidnapping them and putting babies in cages. And just not forget that in another week when the fighting is still going on and suddenly people are like, oh, why is Israel bombing Gaza? Israel is bombing Gaza because Gaza murdered hundreds of us.
Lahav Harkov, I hope you and your family stay safe. Thank you so much for joining me and providing this insight today.
Thank you.